Do you know how powerful this is? Do you know what it means in your life? Or maybe I should ask the question, does it mean anything in your life? Until you learn how to study it and see what God is saying to you, you'll never really be able to fulfill your purpose. Come on and join us. Join us for 45 minutes of purpose here at 45th Street Baptist Church. I guarantee you, you'll come out thinking differently. And my prayer is, somewhere along the line, you'll find the purpose that God has for you. Come on in and join us.
Welcome to 45 Minutes of Purpose with Reverend Andre D. Sparks.
Hello, we're back again. It's time for another wonderful week in our Bible study. I'm so glad you've joined us today. Another 45 minutes of purpose. We try to keep it at 45 minutes each week. I understand that sometimes I might go a little short. Every now and then I might go a little bit, but I'm trying very hard to make sure I keep you right there in 45 minutes because I believe that's all we need in order to grow and to get some understanding about what's going on in God's Word. There's much going on in our communities today. And before I get into the Word, I want to ask you if you believe in the power of prayer. If you believe in the power of prayer, I'd like to ask you, if you will, to be in prayer for a number of our friends in our community. There's so many people being affected by this COVID virus, but specifically, I want to ask you to pray for the Mount Joy Baptist Church in Trussville church family. They've lost two members of their congregation, and one today was a very young woman, and I know it's affected the church significantly. And I don't know that the cause of her death was COVID, but death by any circumstance is tough. So if you would be praying for their leadership and praying for the membership there, and please pray for the family of the young woman who has gone on to glory with the Lord. And be in prayer for 45th Street as we continue to deal with the circumstances surrounding COVID. We've had members as well. Most recently, our own Deacon Darrell Thomas was released from the hospital after being in there for a few days dealing with COVID. And it's our prayer that he's recovering and doing better. I'm so glad you're here tonight. We stopped last week in a second phase of a lesson concerning Moses. And I was excited. I came in excited because we were talking about how to be a leader when you don't feel adequate. We did parts 1 and part 2. Last week, Moses had to learn how to speak up and deal with the circumstances that God had placed. He had to go into Pharaoh's courts, and he had to talk to Pharaoh about letting God's people go. And of course, Pharaoh wasn't willing to do that. And so God had to show him what was what. God had to show him who was in charge. And he did it we talked about a series of plagues until finally Pharaoh had had enough, and he released all those millions of Hebrew people from Egypt. He did it begrudgingly and ended up paying for it with his life at the end. We didn't talk about that part. If you follow the story enough, you'll know that that's exactly what happened. Tonight, we're moving on from Genesis into Numbers, the book of Numbers. And if you would turn to Numbers chapter 14 is going to be the focus of our discussion tonight. Numbers chapter 14. We're going to talk about, this week, we're going to talk about one of two very significant characters in Numbers. Two very significant characters. If you are familiar with the story of the Exodus, I'm sorry, I said Genesis a minute ago, but I meant Exodus. If you're familiar with the story of Exodus, then you know that at the end of the time outside of Egypt, different characters started coming on the scene. We've been primarily talking about Moses and his brother Aaron We've been talking about how they led the children of Israel out under the guidance of God's voice and direction. But this time we're going to go to one of the other characters who is anything but a minor character. His name is Caleb. Caleb. I don't know if you've heard of him before. And we're going to use Caleb tonight as a foundation, and his life as a foundation for showing conviction for the Lord. Now, I'm going to ask that question. How do you develop a strong conviction in the Lord? How do you know what you know and learn how to stand by what you know, no matter what's going on? How is that possible that you can do that? Where do you get the inner strength to do that? Do you have to go through various circumstances in life? Some might say yes. You have to do that. Do you have to have a relationship with someone who teaches you how to do that? Some would say yes, you have to do that. Also, where do you get conviction, and what does conviction mean? I'm going to try again this week, like I did last week, to share my screen with you as we go through this lesson. And we certainly want to allow you to ask questions. You can do it by typing in the chat area of your screen. And of course, I want to thank the behind the scenes folks. There's always somebody behind the scenes, even if they're not in my house, they're helping out. And I want to help the House of Splun for all the work they do each week for Bible study. You guys don't know that Chandra is the one who's receiving those questions and shooting them directly to me, either from the chat screen here in Zoom, or you can do it also on Facebook. She'll get it out of the comment section, or you can send, she sends me text messages asking me various things that you put out. And so I'm glad to be able to respond to those things. She's putting messages up right now telling you that numbers is a focus. And if you got questions, she's saying, let her know. And I also want to thank Greg. Everybody gets together right before 6:30, about 30, 40 minutes before 6:30, and make sure this is going. So this is continuing to be a work in progress. And I wouldn't say thank you to them just for right now. They've been participants continuously in Bible study for years, and they've been making sure that it goes. And so I thank God for them and what they do. But tonight we're talking about conviction, and we're talking about Caleb. And if I share the screen with you and show you this PowerPoint that I have, if I can find it, that's always going to be the problem for me, is finding the PowerPoint. So as I look for it, I want to talk to you. Tell me what you think. Conviction is. What does it mean to be convicted about something, or what does the word conviction mean to you? This is one part about being in Bible study online that becomes very difficult for us to engage in a dialogue like we would if we were sitting in the room together. We could be together and you would ask me questions. You would always ask me questions, and I always enjoyed that. And I want to make sure that you get the opportunity to do that, because the dialogue helps us to grow. And so tell me what you think it is to be convicted. I see somebody's got something. No, that's a comment from someone else about something else. What do you think being convicted mean? I heard somebody hollering outside my house. Is somebody outside my house listening to Bible study as well? I know this is just like regular Bible study when I'd have 2 or 3 people who might say something, who might say something, and there's always somebody. Well, let's see what the PowerPoint says about conviction. And I can tell you this right now, that the PowerPoint is going to lead us just with what I'm saying, and that's just not exactly what I wanted to have. I wanted you guys to be able to say something as well, but the PowerPoint, our Bible study tonight, Divine Encounters, and we're talking about the Minority Report. That's the essence of what Caleb is talking about. Conviction. First of all, it's a penalty someone receives for doing something wrong. You've heard about people being convicted of a crime. So a conviction is that. But conviction is also a firmly held belief that someone might have. Firmly held belief. I guarantee some of you have some convictions about some things. Learning to trust God is a conviction. You know, some people have decided that they don't want to go through life by themselves. They don't want to be the ones who make all the choices. They want to make sure that there's someone who's guiding them and helping them through life. And that's important, that you have someone who can do that. You may not understand that you don't have to make all the choices yourself. You can have someone who can help you decide what to do, how to do it. If you're willing to listen and honor them, then you can do it. And I'm here to tell you that life is much better when you do that. When you struggle and try to make all the decisions yourself, well, that just creates problems for everybody, especially you. And maybe some of you have figured that out already, that when you try to do it yourself, that things don't come out all right. I'm convinced that the way that we continue to grow as believers is by making sure that we have someone who can guide us. And Caleb's example today is one that guides us to the knowledge that we can depend on God. So let me tell you what happened to Caleb. Caleb was one of two young men who were around the leadership when the children of Israel left Egypt. And God led them to the promised land being Canaan. Promised land is just what God said it was. It was the land that was promised to them. All right. But why would God lead them to something that wasn't extraordinary? Why would God lead them to something that wasn't special? And so in order for the children of Israel to understand exactly what God was leading them to, he sent a group of men out to look at the land, to come back with the report. Amazing thing about the land. It would have been easy for God to just create a space for the children of Israel to go to, and that would be their land. But that's not what he did. He was sending them to a special place. One problem with it, y'all, that land was already occupied by some folk. Yeah, that land was already occupied. Some folk, and they didn't want to give up the land. But the point was, the same God who just led you out of Egypt said you're going to have that land. So it doesn't matter who's in that land. God said it's going to be yours. But he wanted the people to understand and believe that. So he sent a group of men out to spy the land. And what he did was send his leadership, Moses, and he sent one representative, had Moses select one representative from each of the 12 tribes. This was going to be his spy party. And they sent them out to look at the land, and they went out and they saw it, and oh my goodness, when they saw it, it was all that God said it was going to be. It was everything they said. They saw giant trees with fruit abundantly. They saw green pastures. They saw all the land that any man could want. They saw grapevines with grapes so big that it took two men to carry the vines of grapes. But they also saw something else in there that gave them pause. Therein lies the problem. They saw in the land giants, giant men. Now, it's an amazing thing. Some people go to different places and they see different things. Two people went to see the land that God said he was going to give them, and all they saw was the greatness in it. All they saw was the gift that God was giving them. All they saw was how much they would gain by going into the promised land. They were giddy with excitement, these 12 spies. And if you have any questions about chapter 13 of Numbers, lays out the 12 spies. But when they get there, 10 of the 12 spies, they don't see greatness, they don't see gift, they don't see what they're going to gain. all they see is giants. And when they see giants, they are afraid. It doesn't matter that it's the same God that just led them out of Egypt. They're afraid of mere men on the earth, even though God is the one doing the directing for them. Now, two of them have firm conviction that the Lord, their God, who brought them out of Egypt, would be able to deliver them. And yet, 10 of them thought otherwise. Let me read Numbers 13 and 23. It says, and they came unto the brook of Eshcol and cut down from thence a branch with one cluster of grapes, and they bare it between two upon a staff. That's how big the grapes were. Yeah, you would think that would have been enough to quicken their heart and to know that God is doing exactly. He said, and they also brought up pomegranates and figs. Yeah, it was a land that was flowing with abundance, and yet they couldn't see it because they were afraid. And so the report comes back. That's what chapter 13 is all about. The report comes back. And when they get back into the tent, the community, and report back to Moses and the rest of the people, the problem results. And the problem, they said, when they get to Moses and Aaron and the congregation of the people, and brought back word unto them, according to verse 26, and the congregation, and they showed them all the fruit. And verse 27 says, and they told him and said, we came unto the land whither thou sent us, and surely it is flowing with milk and honey, and this is the fruit of it. They brought back examples, and my goodness, everybody was excited. But then 28 takes a turn. It says, nevertheless, watch this now, nevertheless, the people be strong in it, and the cities are walled and very great. And moreover, we saw the children of Anak there. The children of Anak there. The children of Anak were believed to be giants. They were larger in physical stature than normal men. They were, I'm sure, by normal standards, frightening to look at. And 29 says, and the Amalekites dwell in the land of the south, and the Hittites and the Jebusites and the Amorites dwell in the mountains, and the Canaanites dwell by the sea and by the coast of Jordan. They had spied out the entire land, north, south, east, and west. But they came back with nothing but fear in their heart until verse 29. Until verse 30. Watch this now. 10 of them came back and they said, but there are giants in the land. Nevertheless, the people are strong, the cities are walled. And here comes the minority report. Verse 30. It says, and Caleb stilled the people before Moses. He calmed them down because the people were in a furor. He calmed them down. And he said, watch this, let us go up at once and possess it, for we are well able to overcome it. That's what's called the minority report. I don't know if you remember the movie from 2002 with Tom Cruise in it. It was a futuristic movie. As a matter of fact, it was set in the year 2054. Sounds a little bit closer now than it did in 2002. But that movie was about, it was futuristic in nature, but it was about people making free choices about harming other people. Yeah, it was about a police unit that could tell you the thoughts of your mind. And so they could stop crime before it happened. And when they could, the reason they could stop crime before it happened is because they could tell when you were thinking something negative about someone, and they would arrest you based on that. Yeah, but what they found out about this unit that was able to do it was every time there was someone who came in with a report about negativity, that there typically was a minority report, a smaller group, another person who had an opposite view about what was going to happen. And that minority report always gave way to free will. So yeah, was it predestined that I'll go out and harm somebody? According to the big group in Tom Cruise's movie, yes. But it came back to that Minority Report in that movie that said, but yet this person still has a choice as to whether or not they'll ever harm someone. It's not predestined that they'll do it. Is it possible that the Hebrew people would go in and be defeated by the Hittites, the Amalekites, the Jebusites, the Amorites, or the Canaanites? It's possible. But according to the Minority Report, as large as they are, as strong as they are, God is still bigger. This one, and I'm telling you about Caleb. There was another one. There's Joshua. We're not going to talk about Joshua this week. We're going to talk about Joshua the next time because there's more to him. But Caleb believed in the power of the same God who had just led them out of Egypt. He believed that any God who was able to bring all of those plagues and put Pharaoh in his place surely is going to be able to deal with any of the people we find in those places. But who is Caleb? Therein lies the problem. Who is Caleb? Who's listening to Caleb? Who's talking? Who is he talking for? He doesn't come from a prominent tribe, so they say. Who is he? Why should we even listen to him? Why should anything he say have anything be listened to by any of us? It's just Caleb, they say. Just Caleb. Watch this. Watch this. Caleb is learning how to trust God. But he didn't just start learning then. No. You see, Caleb had been used to following God all his life. And so when he went into those lands looking, he went there with the belief that if God sent us there, then surely God is able to take care of us there. He went there with the understanding that God is on our side already, or else he would not have sent us there. But what he also knows is that even when God is on your side, you still have to get up and do something. So let me ask you this question. Do you have any memory of when you started learning how to trust God? Do you know when you started? What was the incident or impetus that started you learning how to trust God? Where did that come from? Let me give you a little insight into Caleb. All right, first of all, he had wholehearted devotion in the Lord. He didn't have any doubt that God was going to take care of him. No, none whatsoever. I wonder if it's because of how he had been brought up. See, some folk are brought up in circumstances that are so tough. Somebody on here is going to understand what I'm saying. That they seem like they've been fighting all their lives. Yeah, they seem like somebody's been after them. They haven't gotten a fair shot all their lives. And because of that, they seem like they've been scrapping. I believe that was Caleb's situation. Caleb's name in Hebrew meant dog. D-O-G. Dog. So now tell me, what do you think? What kind of situation do you think he got into with a name like dog? How much fighting do you think he got into? There was a song, I forgot which artist made it, about a boy named Sue. Yeah, those names. Johnny Cash, according to my research department, made that song. Yeah, Boy Named Sue. I can tell you one thing, especially when I was growing up, a boy named Sue was probably gonna get into a fight probably once a day. Somebody thinking they're smart or smart alecky. And I believe when your name in Hebrew means dog, you're gonna fight too. No, he didn't have a name that was worthy of admonition or admiration like Joshua, which meant the Lord saves. Oh, no. When they named babies back then, for some reason, your name would either give you strength or make you stronger. And Caleb's name was one of those that made him stronger, because I guarantee you, they probably treated him like a dog. And because of that, he had already had to depend on the Lord. Yeah, he'd already had to depend on the Lord being there in so many situations, because they had been picking on him. They've been talking about him. And so when he goes into this situation where he has to tell them what he believes the Lord is able to do, there is no question, y'all. He's going to side with the Lord. And the Lord, again, is going to show that his faith is worth validating. And can I tell you this? Can I tell you this? You may have been put in this situation. I know I have. I know I have. That's just part of growing up that strengthens you. That you have to learn how to take care of yourself. I always tell folk, I went to this great big high school, West End High School, and I didn't have any family members there that I knew of. So I didn't have a brother to run to if I got into some trouble or got into a fight. No, I was just gonna be me. So I learned how to run fast. If you're gonna get into something, you learn how to get away. I learned how to develop friends. Yeah, you learn how to develop friends. You learn how to talk, talk your way out of situations. You learn how to do all those things. Why? Because you got to learn how to move fast, or else people will take advantage of you. And I understand to some extent where Caleb is coming from. You learn how to depend on someone bigger than yourself. You do, because you know that if it had not been for that being, that person, you probably would have had some other problems going on. So here we are. He's learning. He's learning how to depend on the Lord. Now, let me make sure you understand this. He knows that he's already been through the greatest ordeal he could possibly imagine with God. Just coming out of Egypt was an ordeal. So from his perspective, dealing with these folk in the land, that wasn't going to create any problems for him. He just had to have faith enough to do it. And I'm convinced that when he stilled them, according to verse 30, when he stilled them, he had a wholehearted conviction that God was going to do exactly what he said he was going to do. And do you know what? He was still in the minority. It didn't matter how passionately he spoke, because he didn't have enough to convince them that what he was saying was true, even though he wasn't the only one trying to convince them. He didn't have enough to convince them that they needed to try a different way. Sometimes you stand alone in your conviction. But you got to be willing and able to do that. Sometimes you got to understand that nobody else is going to sign up for what you sign up for. But you got to be willing to stand there anyway. So the older members of the church can remember a song when it was stand there. We sing that all the time. Stand there anyhow. And it means something. It means something when you have to be the only one there. It's frightening, scary to be in that place. Yeah. People think something wrong with you sometimes when you have that kind of faith. But there's nothing wrong with you because you have conviction. There's nothing wrong with you because you have faith in someone. You have to understand that you developed that because of your relationship with the Lord. And the same God who's gotten you through all those other situations, oh yeah, he's going to get you through this one as well. But you just got to have faith enough. You got to have faith enough to believe that. So watch this now. Caleb has tried to slow him down, but he couldn't. They're in an uproar. The other 10 have got him so hyped up that they start challenging God immediately. This is how awful it's got. They start demanding and saying things that they'll later regret. They start challenging God. It's the same God who just brought them out of Egypt. They start challenging him and saying, why'd you bring us out here? You bring us out here all this way so you can just abandon us? And God is listening to them. Can I tell you, God is always listening to you too. He's always listening to what you say. You might be ashamed sometimes that he is listening to you based on what you say, but he's always listening to you. He understands when you're frustrated, but he also understands when you're faithless. God never puts you in a situation to harm you. That doesn't mean that harm won't come to you. but that's never his intention for you. And so chapter 14 leads out of the impassioned story that Caleb has, the impassioned story that Joshua has, and the lack of passion, fear that the other 10 have. And chapter 14 of Numbers is a frightening passage because it leads to the children, the people of the Hebrew people rebelling against the Lord. Now, how do you come out of Egypt and then come in rebelling against God? This is a pattern that develops, that repeats itself over and over again with God's chosen people. Watch it now, be careful, because it's a pattern that picks up with us too. That God loves us and we serve him, and then something happens and we step away. Yeah, all of this happens. A repeating pattern. We got to be very careful how we deal with those circumstances. The people rebel against him, against the Lord. Let me read you what they say. It says, in all the congregations, chapter 14, verse 1. It says, and all the congregation lifted up their voice and cried, and the people wept that night. Watch this now. And all the children of Israel murmured, not a good word, murmuring, never a good practice, against Moses and against Aaron. And the whole congregation said unto him, watch this, would God that we had died in the land of Egypt, or would God we had died in this wilderness? Verse 3 says, and wherefore hath the Lord brought us into this land to fall by the sword, that our wives and our children should be a prey? Were it not better for us to return unto Egypt? You mean God has brought you this far, and you think your life back in Egypt where you were a slave is better than where you are right now, than for the God who has brought you out, who has cared for you every step of the way? We're talking about millions of people complaining, murmuring. That's a loud murmur. Loud murmur. Yeah, constantly complaining from this point forward. And God has to do something about this. Now, I don't know if you've ever read this story before, but here God has a clear picture of what he's dealing with. He's got his own people that he's carried out. Follow me now. He's carried them out of Egypt. Through no small measure, he has shown them without a doubt, I'm the God who's in charge. Everything that Pharaoh put up, I knocked down as nothing, and showing him that he couldn't deal with me. Pharaoh is now dead. Yeah, Pharaoh can't bother you anymore, and yet you wish to go back to this man and be his slave. Because I showed you your promised land and told you that you were going to have to go in and get it. And you now sit here in fear, worrying about whether or not you're strong enough, even though I'm with you, to go take it. And of the 12 of you, only 2 of you have the faith to go in and do it. Wow. God has got to be, I'm going to use this word, heartbroken. He's got to be so disgusted by what he's hearing. Yeah. And so God directed Moses to let the people know how disappointed he was. But can I tell you something? A good leader always steps up. And that's exactly what happens here. After God lets Moses know how disappointed he is in the rest of chapter 14, Moses, starting in verse 13, intercedes on behalf of the people. He comes in once again and uses his voice to help the people who are being faithless. Moses said unto the Lord, I'm going to paraphrase it. He said, Lord, if you don't deliver the children of Israel, if you don't deliver the Hebrew children into the promised land, then what will those people say who know already the great deeds you've done? He said, if you don't deliver the children of the Hebrew children into the promised land, then they'll say that you weren't able to do it. That'll be a knock on you, Lord. He said, you got to be true to your word. I know they've been faithless. I know they haven't been faithful to you, even though you've been good to them. He says, but you're the same one who brought them out with a cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night. The word has already gone out that these people belong to you. What becomes the word if they never reach the promised land? What do they say about that kind of God? And then verse 18 says, and then verse 17, he says, and now I beseech thee, let the power of my Lord be great, according as thou hast spoken, saying, the Lord is long suffering. He's begging. He's got his best argument on, y'all. He says, the Lord is long suffering and of great mercy, forgiving iniquity and transgression, and by no means cleaning or clearing the guilty, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children unto the third and fourth generation. We know you're a just God, but you're also a merciful God. And so Moses said, please forgive them right now. And verse 19 is a powerful one in chapter 14. He says, pardon, I beseech thee, the iniquity of these people, according unto the greatness of thy mercy, and as thou hast forgiven these people from Egypt, even unto now. Oh, he begs them, and God hears him. Watch this. How do I know that? Because verse 20 says it. And the Lord said, I have pardoned according to thy word. Moses was something else. Moses came and once again was a bridge between God and the people. He came right in when they were murmuring, and he said, Lord, forgive them one more time. And it's interesting that God said unto him that I have pardoned according to thy word. Watch this now. God is fair. He's just. He's merciful, but God will not be told what to do. He said, but as truly as I live, all the earth shall be filled with the glory of God. And he said, because all those men which have seen my glory and my miracles, which I did in Egypt and in the wilderness, and have tempted me now, tested me now. Yeah, they tested me. He said, these 10 times they saw how good I was in Egypt and have now hearkened to my voice. Watch this, verse 23. He says, surely they shall not see the land which I swear unto their fathers. Yeah. He said, I'm listening to you, Moses. But these men that challenged me, the 10 that challenged me, neither of them shall see the land. Their faithlessness cannot go rewarded. They must be challenged in their faithlessness. What does that mean? What does that mean? That means that God wants us to be faithful. And he rewards our faithfulness, but he also deals with our lack of faith with mercy when it's genuine, but it's when it's in the face of how good he's been, he's not going to reward that faithlessness with continuing grace. And so he says, none of these 10 will ever see the promised land. None of these 10. And then he comes up with a consequence that only God can come up with. Only God. They had spied the land out for 40 days. He said, they won't go in, and their children will stay in this desert a year for every day they spied the land out. 40 years. 1 year for every day that they spied the land. Now look, I know you're saying, oh my goodness, but I don't think you understand what's happening here. God is dealing with the ones who did not have faith and preserving the next generation so they can follow him, so he can teach them, so he can love them and show them he is in fact God. And to bring his power home, he strickens every one of those. He strikes those 10 with the plague right then and there. They die. Yeah, they die. They never will go in. But their children, they won't go in, nor will their family, but their children will be the ones who will go in and inherit the land. But did I say it was 10? It was 10 because nothing happened to Caleb. Caleb's faithfulness was rewarded. And can I tell you this? God gave the people exactly what they asked for. What do you mean, Reverend Sparks? Let me take you right back and show you exactly what God did, because it was amazing. God gave them exactly what they asked for. He said in verse 14, the Israelites grumbled against Moses and Aaron, and the whole assembly said unto them, if only we had died in Egypt or in this wilderness. They said it. He didn't. They asked for it. And so I'm going to tell you, be careful what you wish for when you're dealing with God, because he just might give you exactly what you say. There's no time for wishful thinking. No room for it. You remember people said that all the time when we were growing up. No room for wishful thinking. They wished maybe we should have died here in the wilderness. And so that's exactly what God gave them. And that's when they started experiencing God's discipline. And that discipline was that the ones who had trouble, he gave them death in the wilderness. That's exactly what they asked for. Gave them death in the wilderness. But he also, in his mercy, preserved the next generation so that they would see the promised land. Yeah, every person in the congregation or in the tribe who was 20 years of age or older died in the desert. Every one of them who was of adult age died. Gave them what they desired. Everyone that was in there murmuring in the chorus. You better be careful who you sing with. You better be careful who you murmur with, who you talk with, who you seem to be. My uncle used to say all the time, don't be listening ears when folk around talking. Get out of the way. They'll come back and say what you said or what you did. When you see folk not doing right, you get out of the way. He said, everyone in all the families of the doubtful ones, age 20 and below, got exactly what they desired, and that was they died. They died. The ones who were 20 and older died in the desert. The ones who were under age 20 lived. Can you imagine? Under age 20. Whole nother generation waiting to go in. They could not go in until everyone who was older than them died. And that took the 40 years that God had them out there. Yeah. No. They had talked about what their children would go through, but their children were going to experience the promised land that they never would. And God allowed them to wander in the desert. If you go and study, they were at a place called Kadesh Barnea. Yeah, Kadesh Barnea. And they were there for 40 years. In the big scheme of things, it was 3 miles away from the promised land. For 3 miles away, they stayed there. They stayed 3 miles away from the promised land for 40 years and couldn't go in because of their lack of faith. And that was because they were experiencing God's discipline. So what is faith? Caleb was blessed by his faith because God gave him the promise, the land that was promised unto him. Because Caleb was so faithful, God blessed him with the land that he saw. Oh yeah. He benched all the ones who had negative attitudes, just like coaches do sometimes in football games. They have some players who are not quite as good as the other ones and don't believe that they can win. And he has to put them on the bench because they have such a big voice. So he makes them sit down and he makes the other people see that he's sitting them down. Why? Because it has a deterrent effect. And that's exactly what happened here. When those 10 spies were stricken, and they came back and they were stricken with the plague, the rest of the people knew that God was not happy with them. God was not pleased. He was benching them. He was taking them out of the game. And they knew that God will not tolerate us not being faithful to him. Discipline is an act of love. So the ones who did not who did not die were disciplined. The ones who died were punished for their lack of faith. The discipline was so important because it showed the people how God expected them to be faithful to him. Is it hard to be faithful? Yes, sir. Yes, sir, it's hard. It's hard. I saw some coaches back in the day, they used to take players after football games where they didn't play their best, and they take them back to the practice field and make them practice after the game. Why? Because they wanted them to know how you practice is how you play. If you practice sloppy, then you're going to play sloppy. And they take them back and make them do the fundamentals all over again. Some people say it was hard, but I can tell you, some successful football teams came out of some of those practices. Caleb and Joshua went into the promised land with blind faith. Blind faith. They believed God because of their experiences with him, and they felt that if God was telling them to do it, then it must be okay. And that's what we have to have, blind faith, believing what we can't see. The writer of Hebrew gives us our direction. He tells us clearly that faith is the confident assurance that something we want is going to happen. And it's the certainty that what we hope for is waiting for us, even though we can't see it up ahead. I know these Old Testament scriptures are long. They're so impactful and so meaty. I urge you to read this account. Numbers 13, 14, 15, those chapters. Next week, we'll come back and we'll talk about, not next week, but the next time we get together, we'll come back and talk about one of the Bible's favorite sons. We'll start talking about Joshua and what a strong figure and leader he was. I'm glad you joined us this week. We'll get it together as things go on. We have some difficulties. We'll get it together. But this has been 45 minutes of purpose, and my prayer is that it's been purposeful for you. God bless you and take care. Good night.